Welcome to the EACCNY Spring Economic Forecast, the new EU economic statecraft promoting European growth, competitiveness, and security in the 21st century. This event is organized by the European American Chamber of Commerce, New York, in collaboration with the European Commission. My name is Yvonne Bendinger-Rothschild. I'm the Executive Director of the EACC New York, and I will be your host and moderator for today's event. My conversation partners include Ben Carlina. He's a senior economist at the delegation of the EU to the US, Nora Hesse, who is new to the team and head of section, economic and financial affairs, also at the delegation of the EU to the US, and our old friend, Deborah Revoltella, chief economist and director of the economics department at the European Investment Bank. So I would like to welcome everybody to our installment of the EU Economic Forecast. We do that, as you know, three times a year. And in this program, we're going to identify major challenges and opportunities facing the EU and the US over the coming years. The focus topic will be European competitiveness in the light of the recent report by Mario Draghi. And with that, and obviously, not to forget the pressure for growth and the economic security concerns that we're dealing with due to various geopolitical developments. And I would like to dive right into the conversation. And Ben, can you offer us a quick update on where we stand based on the latest analysis that the European Commission, actually Paolo Gentilone's team, put together, and just give us a brief overview?
Sure. First, let me say thanks very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be back with you once again. Maybe just to very briefly set the stage, as everyone knows, Europe has been hit with this series of major economic shocks, beginning with the pandemic, and then we had Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine that caused this commodity and particularly energy price shock. The initial shock from the war and the increase in energy prices is now a thing of the past, but one thing I'd like to emphasize that maybe will frame the rest of the conversation here is how much effective strategic policymaking the EU has been able to put in place and really start implementing very rapidly in response to these shocks. The EU created several new tools to deal with the pandemic, and then once the war in Ukraine started, was able to take these tools and adapt them so that it could deal with the consequences of the shock. A couple of years ago, we were talking about whether Europe was going to have a cold winter and have to turn out the lights. That did not happen. Europe rapidly diversified its energy sources, and that happened much quicker than anybody expected. And now we've got a situation where the RRF is starting to rapidly kick into gear, and money is flowing out the door. And I think one really important thing to note is that for the first time, the EU is introducing this performance-based tool where in return for grants and for loans, member states have been implementing some very significant structural reforms that hopefully will provide the basis for ongoing growth in the future, and I think we'll come back to that. And I think that so we'll talk about this more maybe in a minute or two. But now this year we finally saw a return to growth in Europe, and the spring forecast that we discussed a few months ago actually turned out to be pretty accurate. We've had a slight, very very slight 0.1 of a percentage point downward revision. But the fact that the EU is returned to growth this year, and we expect this to continue in 25 and 26, I think is really good news and evidence of the resilience of Europe in the face of all these shocks. So I just wanted to put that out there, and maybe let me stop there and we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, we're going to go into specific growth figures a little bit later in the discussion. Nora, how does what Ben just told us tie in with the policy measures that were implemented over the last 2 years? And are they showing their desired effects? Where are we on that?
Yes, hi, Yvonne. Let me also start by thanking for the invitation. Very happy to be here in this webinar, my first one, as you mentioned. And to jump right into your question and also to elaborate a bit more on what Ben already started, indeed, the EU economy has shown remarkable resilience in the face of numerous shocks. And this is also thanks to Commission actions that have geared the economy towards its modernization, digitalization, decarbonization. And Ben mentioned already the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which gave member states the financial firepower that they needed to invest in the resilience of their economy. But we were not only reacting with money. I mean, it was a huge financial envelope. It is a huge financial envelope, about 650 billion in total over the whole time period that this facility is implemented. Up until now, we have disbursed about 265 billion that support the economic recovery, but we were more strategic than that. We were not thinking about reacting to the shock only, but also building up the foundations for the future, investing in green technology, investing in climate action. About 42% of this huge financial envelope actually go into green and climate technologies and action. About 26% go into the digitalizations of our economies, and obviously a huge chunk, almost a half, 45%, go into funds that support social and cohesion action. And also, as mentioned by Ben, it was performance-based, meaning also that we have very strong national ownership. So member states are committed and incentivized to actually implement the structural reforms that, that are also looking towards the future, that are investing into our future. But this was not the only thing that we did in the last 2 years to react to the shocks. I mean, we reformed our economic governance rules. We have fiscal rules that are fit for purpose, also future looking, in the sense that we are putting public finances on a very sustainable basis back on track, while at the same time, and I'm going to repeat myself with this throughout this presentation, because this is also the red thread that goes throughout this commission and connects it to the future commission, while also leaving enough space to invest in our future. Another thing that we did, it started as a react of COVID. This was the first huge shock, to our economies, and then followed by the energy crisis, 22, 23. What we did is also very quickly adjust our state aid rules. So we made it possible for member states to support their economies, to support their people, but at the same time also incentivize them to finance clean tech production, to make sure that companies have enough, enough leeway and also the possibilities to carry out necessary investments, while at the same time keeping level playing field for our businesses. And just to mention a couple of other measures, without going into too much detail, we did also look into the future competitiveness of the European Union while designing our measures. And we made sure that we invest, for example, in energy security. We have the instrument called Repower EU, which was targeted. The purpose of this instrument is to make our economies independent of fossil fuels from Russia. So what Repower EU did, and it was implemented in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, is help member states not only save energy, but also diversify their energy sources and invest more in producing clean energy. We also did a lot on, future technologies like semiconductors with our CHIPS Act, access to raw materials with Critical Raw Materials Act, and I'm sure that we'll discuss this in detail. So let me stop here, but to answer your question, just make the point that indeed we did a lot during the last 2 years, and again, starting also after the pandemic, in response to the pandemic. And we now see the results of these actions, because the underlying resilience of our economy is evident. And I'm sure that we're coming right to that when we dig into the numbers.
Yeah. I mean, what I thought was really impressive is and Mario Draghi is also mentioning that in his report, is how much closer European member states are working together. I mean, there's still room to be for improvement, but it's been really, a major difference. And which I think, I don't know if it started with the RRF, and the pressure that the European Commission put on member states to actually come with projects and have them ready to be developed before dispersing the money. I mean, they really put their finger, on the they really put pressure, I should say, on the member states. And I just got back from Germany and Hungary, and I'm telling you, there's building everywhere. I mean, I wasn't too happy about it. I had a train delay, which was directly related to European money building new train tracks. So not so good for me, but a good thing for Germany. But Deborah, the EIB is taking a major part in this. Do you want to give us a quick overview on where we are, what our member states are doing, and the EU as a whole, how we're performing?
No, I think very much I follow what Ben and Nora were saying. I think what we have seen in the last year is the capacity at the European level to follow up with major shocks, the pandemic, the energy shock, but even inflation shock, as with a common approach that has kept the transformation of the economy and investment as a central stage in terms of policy making. So in fact, what we have seen is a strong rule of investment driving growth in the last year. That is a big difference from what happened in the past crisis that Europe was facing. And actually what we see is that investment actually has been recovering very fast. We see a strong rule both of private sector investment, but also general government. The government sector has been really a driver also in terms of investment deployment. And that's very much also related to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, as both Ben and Nora were mentioning. We also look, and we just published a report on European firms that also look at as a benchmark US firms. And we try to have the pulse of what is the private sector really doing. And our reading, I think it's quite interesting because we see that the public sector has taken the last year as a moment for transformation, continuing to invest. We also know that at the macroeconomic level, following the inflation shock, we also have seen monetary policies that was trying to cool down the economy and engineering a soft landing scenario. That means that also investment and corporate investment has somehow been affected. And actually what we see in our survey is firms are telling us the same thing. So they are basically telling us that they are softening their investment appetite. This year we have a larger share of firms that tell us they invested the last year, but there is only a small margin up of those expecting to increase rather than decrease investment. And if we look at the macro data, there is a softening of corporate investment activities. But it's also true that expectation, and there I'm completely with the Commission, is that should be a phase, and actually with the softening of financial condition, actually these we expect to recover. When we ask
Deborah, can I follow up on this for a second?
Yeah.
What is the reasoning behind that? Because if we want to catch up, especially on the adaptation of digital technologies, companies need to invest. They cannot stop investment. It's the same when it comes to infrastructure and energy. They need to invest now. What's the reasoning of the corporates to hold back on investment?
I think I think that there has been so that's why I was linking it to the monetary policy cycle as well. We still see on the corporate sector, we still see that despite the easing of monetary policies and the rates declining, financing conditions for corporate remain still relatively tight. So the biting part of the past tightening cycle is still there for the corporate sector. So that's somehow firms have very clear the need for additional investment. There was a moment of very fast rising rate, very strong uncertainty on the future of monetary policy, etc. So in that, firms are still on the edge of switching to the new mood of easier monetary policies and restarting to invest. But still going back to the positive of what we saw in the past, actually what we saw is that through the whole period, firms were continuing to invest in energy efficiency. That's very good. We're continuing to invest in digitalization. So they actually were moving toward making their business more sustainable and doing the investment that is really needed: digitalization, climate change, adaptation, mitigation. The other point that we see in our survey is that firms have been strongly affected by disruption in terms of trade, more the previous year than this year, but they still are affected. And but the interesting point is that they responded to the disruption on trade mostly by investing in what we call resilience, so making their value chains more resilient, more diversified, investing in digital tracking, everything that makes the firm capable to withstand the shock. But what they didn't do was completely retrenching, so not getting back to only domestic production, etc. Was more working on resilience. And I think this is quite important because it's also show a different approach at the European level that is still more committed to finding the right equilibrium between protectionism and efficiency. So it's really coming out security, efficiency as the main leitmotif at the European level. And the last point maybe that I quickly say, we always in our survey, we look at what are the key barriers for firms' investment. And I think we always point to a number of aspects. One is availability of skills. Energy costs remain a source of concern for European firms, much more than in the US. It will still remain for a while, even if there is a lot of investment. I was mentioning energy efficiency, but also on the transformation of the energy market going on. And then maybe the last point, and that's a potential upside. This time we were asking firms if they see still friction in the European internal market that limit the free exchange within European countries. And actually we have, according to sectors, we still see that firms actually, when they export to another countries within the EU, still see some friction related to consumer protection, differentiated standards, etc. And I think this is an area where at the European level, we really are committed to work more to have a more integrated European market, which will provide a further anchor for enhancing European competitiveness. And I leave it there, and we can come back on different points later.
Yeah, and there was another thing that I saw in Germany, and people are hiring everywhere. I mean, if you're in Germany right now, you do have a job. It's just incredible. I mean, and all kind of levels. I mean, lower level jobs. You know, but there isn't a company that isn't hiring. It's really incredible. But let's go back and get a little bit more granular on GDP growth. So we are back to growth. It's lower than we want it to be. But how, Ben, you already said that, growth is picking up, or is scheduled to pick up for 25 and even more so in 26. Can you give us an overview of how this lines up in general for the EU as a whole, but also for some of the member states?
Absolutely. So the Commission just released its autumn forecast last week, and I think one of the striking things when you dig into the numbers a little bit is just how strong the fundamentals in Europe really are. As you alluded to, there's a very strong labor market. The unemployment rate dipped to 5.9% in October. That's a historic low. In the first half of the year, the economy generated 750,000 new jobs. I think there have been something like 8 million new positions created since the pandemic. And for the past year and a half, we've had wage growth that has been starting to make up for this inflation shock. So we've had real disposable income growing, and we have very strong household balance sheets. One of the reasons why we think growth is set to pick up, just to give you some numbers, the Commission is expecting growth in the EU to be 0.9% this year, 0.8% in the euro area, and that's going to step up to 1.5 and 1.3 respectively in 2025, and then 1.8% growth for the EU in 26 and 1.6% for the euro area. So just maybe a couple of things to put these in context is when you get to growth around 1.5%, that's essentially at potential for Europe. As we all know, Europe has some demographic challenges with an aging population. I think that's probably the most important reason for why potential growth is where it is. But in the context of all these shocks, having growth step back up to potential based on an expected increase in consumer spending, that's not a bad place to be. There was this big terms of trade shock. That's largely in the past. But on the other hand, I think that another discrepancy here is, or not a discrepancy, but a reason to be maybe a little bit optimistic, is because it's been hard for regular households to deal with the fact that now there's, two wars. There's the war in Ukraine. There's also a conflict in the Middle East. And these are, right next door to Europe. It does not feel as far away as it does in the United States. The increase in, even though inflation has, essentially come back to target now, or is well on its way to being back to target, the increase in price levels has been significant, and consumers are understandably upset at how much of an increase in grocery prices they see when they go to the store. And, both households and corporates, I think, they have very strong balance sheets. And as Deborah was talking about earlier, one of the reasons why you haven't seen more spending on the hand of either households or corporates is because the ECB was in a tightening cycle. And so you had financial conditions that were not very easy. For the corporate sector, this was definitely a drag on investment. But for households, it also encouraged them to keep saving. So one of the things is the savings rate in Europe is nearly 15%. That is really, really high. And, there's two big factors, right? It's the uncertainty that has come from these wars and all the geopolitical environment that we're facing. But it's also just this kind of dealing with the inflation shock. It's made consumers quite cautious. And, likewise, there's still maybe some overcapacity in parts of the manufacturing sector in Europe, particularly in areas where you have energy intensive manufacturing. These firms, are having to face a new competitive reality. So these are parts of the reasons why spending has been a little bit low, but it's also why with savings rates this high, maybe uncertainty is settling down a little bit now that we have seen the election results in the US and inflation has come back down. Hopefully spending should begin to pick back up. And on the investment front, it really is, I mean, I suppose there's a little bit of luck involved that the RRF is really picking up right now in terms of allocating the grant and loan money. And this money's starting to like flow out the door into actual investments. So I think that roughly a third of the growth that we're expected to see next year is going to come from directly from RRF money. But basically, I think the thing is a lot depends on confidence because fundamentals are really solid. Both households and businesses have good balance sheets. It's a question of when are they going to feel comfortable enough to start spending again. And the Commission's expectation is that, you know, it's already started, but it's going to continue in 25 and accelerate through 26. So maybe I can stop.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, but I think inflation, when it comes to daily expenses, food, is kind of all over the place. Certain things were really inexpensive, and others like fish and meat was really, I mean, especially fish. I couldn't, believe how expensive the fish was at the farmer's market. But I was kind of like inland, so fish is always a little bit more expensive, but not that expensive. And I was surprised, and I'm always surprised about the high savings rate and the lack of confidence that European consumers, especially Germans, have. And why they're not spending, because you don't get any money for the, I mean, the interest rates are so low that if you keep the money at the bank, there's no, I mean, the return on investment is what, 0.2%? I mean, the rates are ridiculous.
Yeah.
But,
well, the survey data shows that consumer confidence is coming back. So hopefully that's a reasonable expectation of spending will soon follow.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Draghi report, it was saying for most of this period, slowing growth has been seen as an inconvenience, but not as a calamity. So I guess everybody is waiting for spending to be released. And if you think about it, all the RRF money all of this is employing people, so it should make corporates more comfortable. Nora, how do you see the GDP growth across the EU from the policy point of view?
So just to make the connection to what you just mentioned, with the Draghi report and growth developments seen as inconvenience, not a calamity. We have had a very long period of actually very comfortable conditions. And what Draghi starts his report with, and that's still the case, and the point that we're making today is that the EU, Europe, has the foundations to be a highly competitive economy. And if you look at our model, I mean, we're a very open economy. We have a very high degree of market competition. We have a strong legal framework. We have active policies that fight poverty and redistribute income and wealth. So we have a good, solid model to build upon. If we look at growth differentials and competitiveness, competitiveness of EU goods and services on the export market and our export share, I mean, this is also a sign that the EU is highly competitive. But I think your question was going more into the, how long can we afford these levels of growth, and when do we absolutely need to start doing something to ensure continuing economic prosperity, rising living standards. And this is also what the Draghi report was looking into. What are the differences between the EU and its main competitors, and where do we see potential for the EU to do more and to build upon that and become even more competitive in the future. And I mentioned, so we have these advantages which had played well for us as an open economy. The EU benefited massively from globalization. We were very comfortable with cheap energy prices, cheap gas from Russia. We saw, how this could be weaponized and become a vulnerability for us. And also the long period of geoeconomic stability, geopolitical stability, is all of a sudden gone. We live in a different world right now, and we need to face these new realities and see what we can do about that. And the biggest potential that the EU has is, on the first hand, and these are also the priority areas identified by Mario Draghi in his report on the future of EU competitiveness, is innovation, investing in innovation, closing the innovation gap. And that is, on the one hand, to build on our manufacturing strength, but also to invest more in breakthrough new technology. So that's one area to look into. And then the second area that we can look into, and it has been the foundation of our growth model since we introduced the European Green Deal, decarbonization. So growing while at the same time decoupling this growth from carbon emissions. This is what we have been doing in the past years, but we need to make sure that in the future this is linked to lower energy prices, because this has been also one of the issues that has hampered growth, in the EU. And then last but not least, obviously increasing our security, our economic security, becoming more confident and also more forward-looking into reducing our dependencies. And this is what, the priorities of the new commission, incoming soon commission, will build upon. And I'm happy to go into detail there, but maybe let me stop here and make sure that we know what we need to do. We have a plan, and we're going to implement it and make our, make sure that the EU economy stays highly productive, innovative, but also sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, the innovation gap is, actually, it's not the innovation gap. We have plenty of innovation, but the problem is putting the innovation to market. And then, that ties in right with a competitiveness issue. Deborah, what's your take on the ambition that are coming out of the Draghi report? Can Europe deliver, and what will it take to move the needle from your viewpoint?
Yeah, I think the Draghi report, I'm actually a fan of the Draghi report. I was actually had the honor to contribute to part of the report, providing also some input and suggestions. So I'm really a fan of the messages that we see, particularly on a few topics. I think on innovation in particular, he has a very, very strong reading of where the challenges are. What the report did was actually to put in motion some kind of transformations that we will see going forward. Actually, the first element that I see is really on the innovation side. The fact of bringing a consensus. We were talking a lot in the past about the need to support innovation at various stages, do it more at the European level rather than only at the national level, etc. I think what the Draghi report clearly say is we need to do more on innovation at European level, and we need to support particularly the phase of scale up of firms and look at the whole process of growth of firms, looking also at the equity component, but also in terms of really this scale up finance. When the firms start growing, still innovative companies, and they are between the phase B or C, so in between the phase of financing. And that's an area where we see that finally concrete proposals are being put on the table. We are working on it at the EIB level, the Commission as well. We are starting to look at what could be new instrument or way to potentiate existing instrument really to support this growth phase of innovative firms. Another area which I think from the Draghi report that is a bit more back in fashion, following some kind of less active policies in the last year is really on capital market union. There is a new wave on top of all the ECOFIN meetings, so the meeting of a Minister of Finance, all the head of the European institution, Lagarde coming forward, the Commission as well, also our institution, the EIB, coming back with a number of concrete proposals to try to restart the whole discussion on capital market union. Maybe with a few instruments, there is a lot of consensus on this doing something for the young innovative firms. So there, I think we will see something soon. There is a bit of consensus, but there the implementation will be more difficult. But there is a consensus that having the 28 regime for companies actually could be something useful. It has still to be negotiated, but it may be something coming up. And there is a lot of consensus among many on the importance also of single supervision in the capital market as well. I think that is something that will have to be negotiated among the member states. But what I find very positive is that these things are back on the table, and there is they are very high in the policy discussion in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the the capital markets union is a pet peeve of mine. And I was thinking while I was listening to you, maybe we should find new instruments to crowd in private and for crowd in private money and existing maybe RRF funded public money. And do that member state by member state before we really bite off that big chunk for the capital markets union. But Nora, you're the expert. I'm just the moderator here.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the link actually between the forecast and what Ben was talking about, the high savings rate and the huge potential indeed of mobilizing private investment, money that you mentioned just laying in the banks, mobilizing private investment via deep, liquid, well-integrated capital markets union, but also mobilizing for venture capital, because that's also one of the aspects where there's a lot of potential for the EU to catch up with main competitors. So it's in a way it's obvious. The link is obvious. What we need to do is obvious. We just need to get to the work and do that.
Yeah. It's always the problem, it's obvious what we need to do, but actually doing it is a whole different conversation. I want to, when we're talking about innovation, I want to touch upon energy for a minute. We have about 20 minutes left just to give everybody a sense of timing. Europe is a leader in clean energy technology, wind turbines, electrolyzers, a whole slew of innovative technologies. Yet we seem not to be able to kind of move the needle on really taking, making this happen in a to growth, to generate growth with it, to really effectively, address energy dependencies. What's supposed to happen there, Ben? Which fuels are winning out, and is this? Where do you see this developing?
I mean, I think that, energy is pretty key to the outlook. On the one hand, as we've seen, energy disinflation has played a really important role in bringing inflation back down over the past year or so. We've also seen some declines in goods prices. Services inflation has been a little bit stickier. But I think that, the fact of the matter is that if you're talking big picture, it's great to have clean energy, and it's important to have clean energy because actually one of the reasons why we've had such food inflation, it's not all unrelated to climate shocks, right?
Yeah.
Weather events have been part of the issue in terms of bringing the price of basic grains and things like that up. So while it's important to shift to clean energy, I think it's also important that you have enough energy. And so I think, in my personal opinion, I think everything should be on the table there. And it's a question, now that you're looking, there's been a lot of talk about, the impact of artificial intelligence and how much more energy that's going to require in terms of the computing power that you need to really roll that out across society and across the globe. And so I think that's going to be part of the trick. But everything should be on the table, and partly I think one of the reasons why Europe is focusing on this is because this is an area where Europe can build on its existing strengths, where the United States, for example, where people always talk about how innovative it is, the US is not the leader in green energy, and Europe has lots of highly educated people who are working on this stuff. And when they come to market with new technologies, new ways of creating green energy, I think the idea is that you find a way to fund those businesses within Europe, within the single market, and make sure that they can grow from the startup phase through the initial growth phase, capture market share, and become world-class leading companies that have businesses all over the world.
Yeah, and we also need to fund projects by established companies, like the DEMEs of this world, etc., who are waiting for wind turbines to go live. Nora, do you want to comment on that, on the decarbonization strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually disagree with some of the things that you mentioned, because we have achieved quite a lot on reducing our dependencies and decarbonization strategy. This is so we have this commitment. So maybe just to set the goals where we're heading at, what we're looking at. We have the commitment, and it's actually enshrined in European legislation. It's law, and all member states have committed to that, to become climate neutral by 2050. And we have different steps, different targets by when, how we want to get there. Reduce emissions by 55% by 2030, by 90% by 2040, and so on. And we were partially forced by circumstances when Russia invaded Ukraine and gas was not flowing anymore, or became so expensive. We were forced to do a lot very quickly, and we did manage to do a lot very quickly. I mentioned before, we had like 45% of our gas imports from Russia. Now they're below 50%. We managed to reduce overall gas consumption in Europe by 18%. And we actually are now producing more energy from renewable sources than from fossil fuel sources. More energy that is produced and consumed in the EU from wind and solar than coal and gas. So we have, achieved quite a lot. And if you look at how far we've gotten towards target, we're reduced. I think we're at about 38% reduction by now from 1990 until now. And if you see how much the GDP has grown in the EU, I might be repeating myself, but we have managed actually to decouple growth from higher emissions. So this is something that we have achieved to do so far. So these are the numbers. I can go into detail on the policies, but with view of how much time we have left, maybe I don't need to enter into details there. But just again, and this is also cheap energy, maybe one important aspect there. So we're not only reducing dependencies, we're also investing in cheap and clean energy sources, and we have achieved a lot. And this is also a priority for the next commission. So this is ongoing. This is, again, the time frame is 2050 and beyond.
Yeah, Deborah, how is Europe's net zero strategy evolving?
I think I share with Nora a lot of the point that she was mentioning, and the fact that actually we have seen a lot of transformation already, and I think it's something very important, the fact that all the commitments are embedded in European legislation now. So that actually is a strong anchor for continuing this transformation. It's still an area where actually there is a lot of commitment. Europe is moving in the right direction, but there are important challenges in front of us. Nora was mentioning about the energy cost, and it's true that the energy market is transforming very much. But our expert basically say that it will take more or less 10 years until actually the marginal price of energy will be completely determined, taking out gas and other fossil fuels. That means that actually energy costs that are today a concern for a European firm will remain a concern for the next 10 years. So moving in the net zero transition remain and continuing to have this transformation on the firm side remains extremely important. The good story is that a lot of firms, and that was what I was mentioning at the beginning, are really buying in the energy efficiency investment. They were continuing a lot, and they are investing a lot in that direction. There is also on the net zero transition, we see more firms that start not only seeing the risk, but also the opportunity of the net zero transition. And those are those investing the most. So that's actually quite good. There is this kind of movement trying to look more also of the opportunity that it delivers. There is another factor that unfortunately is becoming more visible also in Europe. I think the need for doing much more in terms of adaptation. I said we had a number of cases in the last years which flooding recently in Spain, etc. In Italy last year as well. We have a lot of need of investment in adaptation, need of investing really, and there is a kind of still a consensus to be built on who has to deal with this. There is many countries, there is the perception that it's the rule of the state. There is also a lot that the private sector should do and could do. But I think that we need a very strong new narrative on pushing investment in adaptation at the European level. And I understand that, and maybe one of the top priority of the new commission coming in will actually be in the first 100 days, the new plan on the Green Deal, so they reinforce new messaging. And I think that's quite important. We at the EIB that are quite active as the EU Climate Bank, actually. We are quite active. We are also reviewing our climate bank, our internal roadmap, re-looking at all instruments, all projects, what's to prioritize. We come out from a very positive, successful, first wave of our strategy on climate, and now we are looking at how to consolidate it in the years to come.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I'm still stuck both on the EU quarterly analysis and on the Draghi report on competitiveness and the focus on productivity. How are we going to increase productivity to lift competitiveness? I would like just like one sentence from each one of you, how you see this can actually be done in the light of a serious, in my view, serious labor shortage, and then combined with it a challenge of access to capital. It's not that access to capital is the challenge, because there is capital. There's public capital, there's private capital, and household income that's sitting around not being utilized. But how are we going to make this work?
Maybe if I could just start
Yeah.
quickly, just to say that, one of the things that we've seen is really strong employment growth in Europe, not just in the past year, but really over the past 10, 15, 20 years. There's been steady, except for like the pandemic era, there's been like pretty solid economic growth. When firms are hiring lots of new workers, they don't necessarily need to make the investments in automation and making each individual worker more productive, because they can just hire more people to provide the services or make the goods that they're ultimately producing, whatever the widget is. But I think that you're going to see that's not going to be able to continue, because the supply of labor is going to decrease in Europe. And so mathematically, I think there's just some reasons to expect that productivity is going to increase, because there's not going to be as big a supply of workers available. Firms are going to have to start redoubling their efforts to make each worker more efficient. And this is where all the Draghi report stuff comes in terms of encouraging innovation, encouraging funding for new startups. I think this is why there's so much focus on promoting new firms, because so often when you hear about how can we do it at existing firms, in practice that comes to like, oh, VW said that they might be closing some factories. Let's think about how to protect these jobs. What you want to be doing is creating new businesses that are figuring out new solutions, and that's where the productivity growth comes from.
Yeah.
And to pick up on
Nora?
yeah, exactly. I just wanted to follow up because I had this storyline in my head and Ben just started it, but I think, it continues from there that, when you have these new businesses, in these new companies, you need the people with the right skills actually to be able to work in these companies. And when we talk about competitiveness, we cannot not talk about skills and knowledge and the people who will be working in these green and digital and innovative economy. And this is so, coming back to your question, lack of skilled labor. Well, you can either upskill, reskill people that you have on the market. You can make sure that you make full use of the full labor potential, just opening a bracket of, women participation in the labor market, and then all the measures that go beyond that with childcare and so on. But coming back to skills, lifelong learning, adult learning, working with companies to know what kind of skills, what kind of people they need for their factories, production, and so on, to make sure that there is a link between what universities are doing and what industries are looking for. And just generally thinking about this as a whole process. It's not like one-off, you go to university and that's that, it's continuing. And obviously the second part is skilled migration. If you make full use of your potential, and if that's not enough, then you bring in skilled people into the labor market from abroad.
For sure. I mean, every report I've been reading is saying that we need skilled migrants without any question. We have a few minutes left. External factors. Europe obviously must react to a world less stable. You already mentioned the war in Ukraine that just seems not to be ending, the war in the Middle East, and then a number of other factors that are adjacent, supply lines that are making products more expensive, and other issues around the world, grain prices, etc. Can we talk a little bit about the industrial strategy that the European Commission has been working on for the last, what is it, 3-5 years, and how what your views are on how that is allowing the EU to tackle some of these issues more long-term and strategically?
You want me to take that, Yvonne?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, look, you know, the EU, everybody knows that the EU is an open economy. And obviously one of the sources of uncertainty that has been in the news a lot is protectionism coming? Is there going to be a lot of geopolitical fragmentation? And I think it's just worth touching upon this because I think a lot of people are thinking about it, that you know, global trade and capital flows have benefited Europe a lot, and there is not going to be winners from any increase in protectionism or trade wars if that occurs. But I think that the risks go both ways, and that it's, while there's expectations, you know, maybe we're not going to be in a first best world going forward, but it's not clear that we're actually going to face, you know, significant trade wars and significant conflicts. There's going to be a little bit of tension, but there's no reason to think that it's necessarily going to be the end of the world, particularly because there's other factors besides, say, tariffs. You know, exchange rates can adjust, fiscal policy matters, but to the extent that policymakers in Europe in particular are focused on improving the business environment and making sure that firms have the ability to increase their competitiveness through access to capital, through access to skilled workers, through deepening the single market. I think that's sort of the broad focus of what policymakers are thinking. And so I think that it's encouraging that that's sort of going to be the environment for the next couple of years. We don't yet know what all these new competitiveness tools that the incoming commission is going to create, but you know, Commissioner-elect Dombrovskis, who should be appointed the new commissioner for economy in the coming days, this is going to be one of his major tasks. And so, you know, as an employee of the commission is looking forward to like hearing a little bit what more these specific things are. But I think anticipation is building that there's going to be some significant movement in the new commission.
And not only that, I mean, I had this conversation with a commissioner, and he's a major. I mean, we're talking about competitiveness, but whom are we competing with? I mean, I think we're competing less with the United States. We obviously measure ourselves against the United States, but Europe and the US are partners. You know, I mean, and companies, I see that in my day-to-day work. Companies are coming here to look for partnerships, not to eat up, you know, not to leave Europe or to eat up American companies. No, this is about working together, building partnerships, combining expertise, innovation, and then building up, you know, I almost said to new glory. But this is not either or, Europe or the US. This is a combined effort from what I'm seeing. I don't know, Deborah, if you wanna comment on that.
Yeah, I think what we will see in the next what we are in front is a lot of uncertainty coming in, and that's the uncertainty actually very much on the, I think, on this discussion on tariff, what the US will do in terms of tariff, etc., is bringing really a lot of uncertainty. And I think there is quite a consensus saying that we should, the uncertainty is on in which sectors, how much, but not on the fact that the tariff will come. But I agree that with, I very much agree actually with Sven that there are ways for adjusting, and the exchange rate will play its role. So actually, I'm not even sure what will be the final effect for the US economy of having the additional tariff and taxes in the medium term. So there will be adjustment. And then what this brings me to the point of saying that European industries actually have shown a lot of resilience. What I was mentioning before, in the last years, we have seen resilience coming in, working on resilient supply chain, working maybe on adding a layer to business, but to continue to do business. And that's something quite positive. And in that sense, I very much also agree with Ben that it's very important to keep the accent on policies, on the support to innovation, on making the business environment smoother, on giving a better an environment in which in Europe also firms can compete, can prosper better and become more productive, if you want. And that will also help in the international arena. And I think there are, it's part of the policy. I think on the policy point of view, what we see so far is a lot of support to the innovation, a lot of very targeted analysis looking at dependencies. There are instruments on addressing dependency, on economic security, but they are voluntary targeted exactly to avoid to enter in a retaliation system, but really having a more secure and more effective value chain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that goes without a question. Any final words? Nora, do you want to share a final thought as a European citizen living in the United States? How do you feel about the European economy?
I feel optimistic about the European economy. I mean, looking at the outlook, things are only getting better. You mentioned you're a big fan of the Capital Markets Union. I'm a big fan of the single market. So this is, something, and the single market, and my final words come with the message of unity. So when we work together, be it within the EU, removing barriers to trade, investing in our future, we're strong. And the same message goes when we look beyond our borders. As you say, we want to build on our partnerships. We want to work with partners across the globe. Because I think this is where the EU is strongest, and this in turn comes back to strong growth and to my optimism and positive message for the future.
Very good. You and we're going to make it happen. Ben?
No, I mean, I don't have much to add. I think that that's a good way to put it, and I think that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Europe has very highly educated, highly skilled people. It's got good infrastructure. It's got policymakers focused on improving the business environment. And as it has shown, it is resilient to shocks. So I would expect that to continue.
Yeah, no, I agree. Deborah?
Yeah, and I agree. I agree on the positive note. Closing on a positive note, I think there is another element, and maybe that's also closer to what we do as an institution. I think we come out from a period of very strong policy support behind the economy. We still have a little bit of this coming, and the recovery and resilience facility is still there, etc. But I think that more and more we have to continue working with this, what we call financial instruments, but basically is this way of incentivizing the private sector to do part of its job. And I think it's a complementary rule. On the one side, the public sector has to play its role, sometimes incentivizing the private sector, sometimes creating the condition for a good business environment for firms to invest, and that's the role of the private sector. But then if you make it right, the private sector will come in. And I think that's also related to Capital Market Union. At the end, we want private money to flow across instruments and across countries. It means that we have to engineer a way in which this transfer from the bank saving to other instrument really happens. And that's a part also a lot of policy work behind that.
Yeah, without any question. And as you know, we just started the EACC New York, and the EIB just started the Transatlantic Resilient Infrastructure Alliance, where we're doing exactly that, bringing public and private money together, bringing public and private expertise together, and doing that both from the US and Europe. So a truly transatlantic initiative. So with that, that concludes today's webinar. Thank you to our panelists for joining us. Thank you to our guests for joining us. We have a couple of programs still, two EACC programs, Business Insurance Trends and our Commercial Real Estate Update, and two partner events that I wanted to point out. November 21st, tomorrow, the Portugal Economic Forum on Health and Innovation. And on December 9th, the annual Capital Link Invest in Greece Forum, also a very good event. And we will be uploading a recording of this webinar on our website. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everybody.